Can you really add 200 horsepower to a Junkyard 5.3 without boost? It's easy. Start off with a flat top 5.3 liter, add the right cylinder heads, the right camshaft, then the right intake manifold, and of course, proper tuning. Hello everybody, I'm Richard Holder, and as always, welcome to the channel. The question for today, can you add 200 horsepower to your 5.3 liter? And before you answer very quickly, no, we're not adding boost, because if we just added a turbo to it, adding 200 horsepower would be very, very easy. The question is, can we add 200 horsepower to a naturally aspirated 5.3 using the normal kind of bolt-ons, heads, cam, intake manifold, headers? Can we really add 200 horsepower to the stock bottom end 5.3 liter? Little spoiler alert here. The answer is yes. So maybe the question isn't so much can we do it. I mean, it takes everything. It takes the right heads, the right cam, the right intake manifold, the right headers, all of that stuff. Can you really add 200 horsepower to the 5.3 liter? Yes, you probably can. Maybe a better question is, would you? Would you go through all the trouble and the expense and all the compromises that are necessary to add 200 horsepower? Here's how we did it. Okay guys, let's jump right in to find out how we add 200 horsepower naturally aspirated to a 5.3 liter. And obviously we have to do a ton of different modifications and we'll go through them. But we started out, as we always do, with a Junkyard 5.3 liter. And we went and got one from the wrecking yard, brought it over, put it on the dyno at West Tech, added long tube headers and collector extensions, a Mazira electric water pump. We obviously had a Holley HP management system to tune everything and enough injector obviously to supply that. But otherwise the motor was stock and it produced 342 horsepower and 379 foot-pounds of torque. So it did fairly well. These vary when you get these junkyard motors depending on what condition they're in. Anywhere from here up to 350 or so. And then also it depends on whether or not you're starting with an LM7 that has the dish piston or the L33 that has the flat top. And we'll get into more on that. Here's what happens when you do a typical kind of camshaft upgrade. This one was my low buck truck camshaft, so that's a 550 lift, 552 lift, a 212, 220 something duration at 50, and 107 degree lobe separation angle. There are lots of good cams out there for the LS from Brian Tooley Racing, Texas Speed, Cam Motion, Comp Cams, Tick. Everybody has a good camshaft for these. This gives you an idea. It's pretty easy to get like 60 to 70 horsepower from just the camshaft, and the camshaft is what the thing is that you should be looking at to make your first modification, because it's going to do the biggest power change. This one has pretty good low speed power, at least from 3,000 on up, and allows you to rev this thing out past 6,500 if you want to do that. But good torque gains, good power gains, pretty typical of a camshaft. But here's what happens when you want to go looking for some pretty healthy power gains. But it takes a lot of everything. What I'm going to do is get rid of the camshaft here. This is an example where we made 484 horsepower and peak torque was up to 424 foot-pounds of torque. But what was required to do that was basically everything. Now the bottom end stayed the same, but we had a bigger camshaft. We had a crane camshaft in this case, which was a 590 lift, 224, 232 degree duration at 50, and 113 degree lobe separation angle. We also had ported stock 706 on this head, on this combination from Total Engine Airflow, and then also a fast LSX-RT intake manifold. We still had headers on it, and obviously we still tuned it. But 484 horsepower. Pretty good power from this combination, but if you want even more power than that, you're going to have to get really specific about the changes. So let's check that out. Okay guys, let's continue on in our quest for making more and more power, how to add 200 horsepower to your 5.3 liter. In the last clip we saw, we went from our stock combination, which was 342, 3 horsepower, and 380 foot-pounds roughly. And then we added ported 706 heads, a crane camshaft, and a fast intake, and we were up at 484 horsepower. But to go beyond that, what we did was basically change almost everything. We just made everything a little bit better, and we pushed this thing up to 512 horsepower. and 440 foot-pounds of torque. And the way that we did that, as I said, was by changing everything, starting off with replacing the dish piston in our LM7 5.3 liter with a flat top piston. And in this case, we didn't put an aftermarket piston in. And alternately, you could do that, but alternately, you could also take the flat top piston from the 4.8, because that's the way that it comes, and put it in the 5.3. Then you'd have a flat top 5.3. We didn't even do that. What I did was I was lucky enough to score a flat top 5.3, which is an aluminum L33 from the wrecking yard. So we then started off our combination with a flat top piston, which allowed us to have more static compression. We then installed a set of really good set of heads. In this case, they were 220 as cast heads from the guys at TrickFlow. Then the guys from Brian Tooley Racing took the as cast heads and further ported them excuse me, and we milled them. So we had added compression, which adds power everywhere. We had more head flow than the TEA ported 706 heads, and then we had a port matched fast manifold, so the same kind of manifold and 102 millimeter throttle body and inch and 7/8 headers instead of the inch and 3/4 headers. And the combination of all this stuff really pushed the power output. Like I said, 512 horsepower, 440 foot-pounds of torque. But because we added static compression, even though we went to this bigger camshaft, in this case on the 510 horsepower combination, this was a cam from Brian Tooley Racing. This is their Red Hot cam, which was a 619, 617 lift split, a 221, 240 something degree duration split, and 113 degree lobe separation angle. So in specs, it actually looks like it's slightly smaller than the 224 cam that we had from Crane, but actually it makes a bit more power. So this pushed everything up. We added torque everywhere. We added power everywhere. So a good combination, 512 horsepower and 440 foot-pounds of torque. But now let's take a look and see how we push it even further, and what do we need to do to actually add 200 horsepower over a stock 5.3. Okay guys, we're almost there. We started at 342 horsepower or so. With our stock 5.3, we're up to 510. But how now do we push it even further to make more power? One of the limitations that we have is available piston to valve clearance. So unless we put a piston in there that has valve release where we could put bigger camshafts in, then we could obviously make more power. But if you're using the stock bottom end, in our case, our 510 horsepower is using a stock bottom end L33. So it has a flat top piston, but it has no valve reliefs. So we have our TrickFlow heads on it. We've already milled the heads. We already have a good sized camshaft in it. We're going to go up one more step in camshaft and then try a short runner intake manifold to push power up higher in the RPM range. But as you'll see, there is a trade-off in average power production when we do that. So this is our stock combination, 342. We have 510 horsepower with our fast, our TrickFlow heads, and our BTR Red Hot camshaft. And here's what happened when we installed a slightly bigger camshaft. This one was a Brian Tooley Racing Stage 4 LS3 camshaft. And that one was 636 lift, a 233, 250 something duration, and 113 degree lobe separation angle. We then installed the Brian Tooley Racing Trinity intake manifold and 102 millimeter throttle body. We still had our inch and 7/8 headers in there. So basically this was an intake and cam upgrade from the 510 horsepower version. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. One of the things that I would kind of like to see is, I would like to see this combination run with a fast manifold on it. Now we are going to lose some peak power, but if you take a look at this, we're losing a lot of power, a lot of average power, in fact power all the way out to 66 or 6700 RPM. So if you don't want like the maximum power number like we did, and that's kind of what we were going for, we were just going for a big peak power number, and you wanted more average power, something with a bit more runner length obviously is going to help that out. Here's an interesting comparison. We'll go ahead and get rid of our 510 horsepower version, and you can see that even though we're making really big power, 542 horsepower and 404 foot-pounds of torque, you can see even compared to the stock motor, the stock Junkyard 5.3, and this was only an LM7 and not even an L33, that combination is making more power than this really, really high RPM, big power unit, all the way up to 4,700 RPM. So even though we're making, you know, a lot of power, we're making it at a fairly high RPM. I mean, this thing made peak power at 76 or 7,700 RPM with a short runner intake manifold and that big camshaft. We also have our trick flow heads on there that are flowing very well. But it just goes to show you, when you start making really, really big power numbers and you're making a high specific output, you're going to do it at a higher engine speed. Let me know in the comments what you think. What other intake manifold would you like to see on this combination? We tried a low ram. We tried some of these other short runner manifolds. This one seemed to do the best of all of the short runner manifolds. But maybe maybe a stack injection would be cool. Maybe a dual plenum cross ram with short runners on it. All that stuff. But let me know in the comments what other intakes you guys would like to see. I'm Richard Holder. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, do all that stuff. And I'll keep testing.